The road stretched before me like a shadowed artery, winding deeper into a darkness no headlights could fully penetrate. They warned me not to take this route, not at night, not alone. Locals called it the Highway of Horrors, a place where the ghosts of the past never slept. But I needed to make time. And besides, those were just stories, right? The engine hummed beneath me, the only sound breaking the silence as the night swallowed me whole. The clock on the dashboard blinked 2:17 a.m., and every mile seemed to drag me further from the world of the living. Yet, something in the air felt wrong, a prickling sensation, like being watched. I brushed it off, chalking it up to the oppressive darkness and endless road. But deep down, fear itched under my skin. Ahead, a figure stood on the shoulder, drenched in rain that wasn't falling. She looked young, maybe 20. Her soaked dress clung to her, her head bowed low, dark hair hiding her face. I slowed to a stop, lowering my window slightly. "You okay?" I asked, fighting the unease creeping up my spine. She looked up, her eyes hollow and wide. Her lips trembled, but no sound escaped. A pang of pity twisted through my gut. I opened the door and nodded toward the back seat. "Get in. I'll take you to the next town." She slid into the car, silent as death. In the rearview mirror, I saw her eyes staring, but there was something off. Her gaze didn't seem to register me or even the road ahead. She just stared, blank and unblinking. When I tried to ask her questions, she remained mute, her face pale as bone. After a few miles, I glanced back, but she was gone. My heart slammed in my chest. I'd felt her presence just moments ago. Turning around, I saw nothing but a dark, damp imprint on the seat, water dripping where she had once sat. An icy chill clawed up my spine as her hollow eyes seemed to haunt the air. I told myself it was over, just a freaky experience. But as I neared mile marker 43, I heard it, faint at first, barely more than a whisper of agony. I rolled up my window, trying to block out the sound, but it only grew louder. A woman's voice, raw and desperate, filled the car. Her cry twisted with sorrow and rage, a sound born of the deepest despair. "Help me, please," the voice echoed, chilling me to the core. My knuckles turned white on the steering wheel as her scream grew louder, stabbing through my skull. I pressed the gas pedal, my car roaring forward, but her cries didn't fade. They only grew sharper, as if she were clinging to me, begging for a salvation I could never give. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the voice stopped. The silence was suffocating, heavier than before. It felt as though the darkness around me had tightened, trapping me in some unseen grip. A flash of headlights appeared in my rearview mirror, blindingly bright against the black night. At first, I felt a surge of relief. Another car meant I wasn't alone. But that relief quickly turned to dread as the headlights bore down on me, closer and closer, as if the driver was intent on ramming me off the road. I slammed the gas pedal, my car surging forward, but the lights matched my speed. Heart pounding, I swerved to the side, but the headlights followed with terrifying precision, always just a breath away from my bumper. I glanced in the mirror, expecting to see a vehicle, but there was nothing, just the blazing white light. Relentless and unnatural, suddenly, it veered off the road, disappearing into the darkness as if it had never been there. I gripped the wheel, my mind reeling. Had I imagined it? The pounding of my heart told me otherwise. Fog began to creep along the highway, thick and clinging, limiting my vision to just a few feet ahead. I squinted through the haze, trying to make out the road, when shapes started to emerge, shadowy figures just beyond. They appeared on the sides of the road, half-formed, with limbs that stretched and twisted in unnatural ways. At first, they stood still, watching. Then, they began to move, edging closer with each mile. I could feel their eyes, empty yet piercing, fixed on me as though I were an intruder in their world. One of them darted in front of the car, a flash of black that made my heart lurch. I swerved, narrowly avoiding the figure, and heard a faint thump as if I'd hit something solid. My hand shook as I glanced in the rearview mirror, but there was nothing behind me. Only shadows that lingered at the edge of the fog, growing in number, closing in. My phone suddenly lit up with a notification. Piercing through the darkness. I glanced down, and a shiver ran through me as I read the message, "Welcome to the Highway of Horrors. There's no going back." The phone went dark. I threw it aside, panic clawing at my chest. I needed to escape, to get off this road, but every mile marker I passed seemed to drag me deeper into the heart of some unspeakable nightmare. My mind raced, thoughts spiraling as I drove, but something in my gut told me there was no escape. I could feel the road wrapping around me, pulling me closer to something ancient and malevolent. It was as if I had stepped into a place that was alive, hungry for more than just my fear. The fog thickened, and soon, the shadowy figures returned, moving in from all sides. They pressed against the car, their faces pressed to the glass, eyes hollow and hungry. I screamed, slamming on the gas, but the road stretched endlessly. The figures clawed at the windows, their mouths opening in silent screams, faces twisted with rage and sorrow. Desperation clawed at me as the figures closed in. Their hands slid over the glass, leaving streaks of darkness, their forms blending into the fog until they were all I could see. My foot pressed down on the gas until the engine roared in protest, but the final moment, I realized the truth, a sickening, horrific truth that settled deep in my bones. This road wasn't just haunted. It was a trap, a cursed stretch where the souls of the dead were forever bound, and it would claim anyone foolish enough to venture here alone. I was just the latest victim. The shadowy figures pressed closer, merging with the fog until they were inside the car, surrounding me, suffocating me. Their hands closed around me, dragging me down into an eternal night where screams echoed, and the road stretched forever into the darkness that had swallowed me whole didn't relent. It pressed in, thicker than fog, as if the night itself had weight and intention. I couldn't see the road anymore, couldn't feel the grip of the steering wheel. Cold hands clawed around me, pulling at my skin, my limbs, each grasp carrying the sensation of forgotten pain and suffering. I was becoming one with them, the souls trapped here, cursed to haunt this endless stretch for eternity. But then, just as despair fully took root, I felt something shift, a jolt. My body was slammed back into my seat, and my hands found the wheel once more. The car lurched forward, my headlights piercing the thick night as if I'd somehow broken free from their grasp. I was still on the highway, and I could still feel them watching me from the shadows on either side of the road. Silent but vengeful. But the road was back, stretching forward like a lifeline. Panting, I gripped the wheel until my knuckles turned white. My brain was screaming for me to turn around, but some sick compulsion kept me driving forward. The air felt thicker now, soaked in a tension I could almost taste, a mixture of decay and something electric. Every nerve screamed in anticipation, as if the darkness was holding its breath, waiting. It started as a faint murmur, barely audible over the hum of the engine. But the sound grew, voices whispering warnings and promises that chilled me to the bone. Turn back. It's not too late. Join us. The voices overlapped, a cacophony of tortured tones, each one laced with anguish and resentment. I tried to ignore them, to focus on the road, but their whispers drilled into my skull. Every word was a reminder that I was no longer alone on this highway. It felt as if they were inside my head, their memories pressing into my mind like intruders. I could see glimpses of their past lives, fragments of horror, of violent ends, of blood spilled on the asphalt. My stomach turned, and the bile rose in my throat. I had to get out of here, but the road kept stretching on, no end in sight. Just when I thought the worst had passed, the blinding headlights flared in my rearview mirror again. The phantom car was back, roaring down the road, moving impossibly fast, as if it had come from nowhere. The high beams were so intense that they bathed my car in unnatural light, leaving no shadow unturned. I pressed the gas, my car hurtling forward, but the phantom car stayed right on my tail, engine revving like a beast unleashed. The headlights filled the cabin, disorienting me, forcing my eyes back and forth between the road and the blinding light in the mirror. I swerved left, then right, but the phantom car mimicked every move. Its headlights pulsed, and for a terrifying second, I saw a face behind the wheel, a twisted, grotesque figure with hollow, burned-out eyes and a mouth stretched into a silent scream. This was no living being, it was something else, a remnant of the cursed highway, out for blood. Then, in a sickening move, the phantom car sped up, overtaking me. I watched in horror as it veered wildly, swerving back and forth on the road, as though it were taunting me, inviting me to follow. My foot wavered on the brake, but some dark pull kept me going, unwilling to lose sight of it. The car sped ahead until it vanished into the darkness, its taillights fading like the last embers of a fire. But before it disappeared completely, I saw it make a hard turn, veering off the road into what looked like a barely visible side path, hidden behind a thicket of dead trees. I should have driven past, left it behind. But something compelled me, tugging at the deepest parts of my curiosity and fear. Against every instinct, I slowed and turned down that side path, following the faint glow of the phantom car's lights. the side road was narrow and rough, lined with the skeletal remains of trees that loomed over me like bony hands. The headlights ahead flickered like a candle in the wind, drawing me deeper into the bowels of the cursed highway. There was no going back now. The main road had disappeared, swallowed by darkness. I could feel it, the weight of the highway's curse settling on me like a shroud, promising that this would be my final journey. The voices returned, louder this time, screaming, laughing, taunting me in a chorus of agony. We're here. Waiting. Another one joins us. In a sickening twist of the wheel, my car hit something, a thump that rattled my bones. I slammed on the brakes, heart pounding. The headlights illuminated the object in the road, and I recoiled at the sight. It was a man, sprawled out on the asphalt, eyes wide open, staring right at me. But his gaze was empty, lifeless. Blood pooled around him, and his mouth was twisted in a final, silent scream. I blinked, and he was gone. Only a dark stain on the pavement remained. The phantom car's taillights vanished entirely now, leaving me in complete darkness. My headlights flickered, struggling to cut through the oppressive night. Panic set in, a raw terror that clawed at my chest. I needed to turn back, to escape this hellish road, but the engine sputtered, the gas pedal unresponsive. The car rolled to a stand, swallowing my car. Shadows shifted within it, taking shape, forming figures that grew more solid with each second. They pressed in around the car, faces emerging from the mist, twisted, agonized faces, their eyes hollow, pleading, accusing. One face drew closer, pressing against the driver's side window. It was the girl I'd picked up earlier, her wet hair plastered to her face, her lips mouthing words I couldn't hear. Her eyes met mine, and I saw a flicker of recognition, a spark of life amidst the deathly pallor. Please. Help. Us. She mouthed, her hand pressed against the glass, and then the others joined her. One by one, the faces crowded in, burned faces. Broken faces, faces twisted in agony and sorrow, each one bearing the unmistakable mark of a violent end. They whispered, begged, their voices a collective plea that dripped with despair. Join us. They chanted, their voices merging into a haunting melody. Stay with us. Forever. I screamed, slamming my fists against the window, trying to break free from their gaze, but their faces only grew closer, their voices rising in a chorus of despair. The fog thickened, swirling inside the car now, seeping into my lungs, my mind. I could feel them clawing at me, dragging me down, a weight pulling me deeper into the cursed highway's grip, and then, I understood. I had become one of them. Another soul bound to the highway, another specter to haunt the cursed stretch, forever trapped, forever waiting for the next unfortunate soul to wander down this road. The last thing I saw before the darkness claimed me entirely was my own reflection in the rearview mirror, pale, ghostly, my eyes wide and hollow, mouth stretched into a scream that would echo along the highway of horrors for eternity. The moment I accepted that I was trapped, the atmosphere shifted. The whispers grew louder, a symphony of terror echoing through the deadened night. But these weren't just whispers, they were screamed cries that clawed their way out of the darkness and tore through my mind. Each voice told a story, each scream a memory of some gruesome fate met on this cursed stretch of road. Faces appeared in my peripheral vision, just beyond the reach of my headlights, illuminated briefly before fading back into the night. They flickered in and out like candle flames, each twisted in eternal torment, each trying to escape an invisible prison. My eyes darted left and right, catching glimpses of their hollow, accusing stares. Every shadow felt alive, every creak and rustle a threat. I gripped the wheel with white-knuckled intensity, sweat pouring down my face as I forced myself to keep driving forward. But the road ahead wasn't empty anymore. I spotted a figure standing in the middle of the road, illuminated by my headlights. It was a young man, his face blank with a look of endless sorrow, his clothes tattered, blood smeared across his shirt. He raised his hand slowly, a silent request for a ride. Instinct screamed at me to keep driving, to pass him by, but an unseen force compelled me to slow down. My foot pressed gently on the brake as if controlled by some external power, and the car came to a halt just inches from the figure. He didn't move, didn't flinch. His eyes were hollow, lifeless, yet they bore into mine with a weight that felt unbearable. Slowly, he walked toward the passenger door and, without hesitation, slid inside. I wanted to scream, to tell him to get out, but my voice was trapped in my throat, paralyzed by the cold terror that gripped me. The car was silent, yet his presence filled every corner with an oppressive energy, a darkness that seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. He looked straight ahead, hands resting on his knees. And then, in a voice as hollow as the grave, he spoke. "Do you know what they did to me?" he asked, his voice echoing as if coming from some distant, forsaken place. I shook my head, unable to respond, unable to break free from the paralyzing fear. "They left me here," he continued, "on this road. To die. Alone. Betrayed." He turned slowly to face me, his eyes black pits that seemed to pull me in. "And now, I wait here. For people like you. People who think they're just passing through." I forced myself to look away, back to the road, desperate to escape his gaze. But the moment I did, I saw them, more figures appearing in the darkness ahead, lining the road like silent sentries. They were everywhere, emerging from the shadows one by one, each one a victim, each one with a story of betrayal and death. Their eyes followed my every movement. And the air grew thick with their silent accusations. It was as if I had become one of them, another soul bound to this highway, doomed to wander forever. The road stretched on endlessly, the ghosts and phantoms growing in number, filling every inch of the darkness around me. My breath came in shallow gasps, and I could feel my sanity slipping, unraveling with each mile. Then, without warning, the young man beside me spoke again. "There's one way out," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the pounding of my heart. I looked at him, desperate for any escape, any way to break free from this nightmare. "Look in the mirror," he said, pointing to the rearview mirror above us. I hesitated, a sense of dread twisting my stomach. But something compelled me to follow his command. Slowly, I lifted my eyes to the mirror. What I saw sent a shock of terror through my entire body. The reflection wasn't my own. It was a twisted, nightmarish version of myself, pale, hollow-eyed, with blood dripping from the corners of my mouth. My face was contorted in a rictus of pain, my eyes wide with a terror that seemed endless. And behind me, filling the back seat, were dozens of ghostly faces, all staring at me, their expressions frozen in agony. The reflection grinned, a cold, mocking smile, and then, "Down voice," it whispered, "You're one of us now." I screamed, slamming my fist against the mirror, but the image didn't shatter. It remained, staring back at me, laughing silently as if mocking my futile attempts to escape. The car lurched forward on its own, accelerating down the endless road. My hands were frozen on the wheel, my body a puppet controlled by some unseen force. The phantoms surrounded the car, their faces pressed against the windows, their whispers filling my ears. "Join us. Forever." The road twisted and turned, pulling me deeper into the darkness, into a place where time and reality no longer held meaning. I was no longer just a driver, I was becoming part of the highway itself. Another lost soul doomed to haunt its cursed path for eternity. As the darkness consumed me, I realized the truth. There was no escape from the highway of horrors. It was a place that claimed all who entered, a twisted realm of despair and death, where the lost were trapped forever. And as I faded into the shadows, becoming one with the highway, I knew that I would be waiting for the next unfortunate soul who dared to venture down this haunted road, doomed to join the endless procession of the damned. The darkness closed around me, thick and suffocating, as if the highway itself were swallowing me whole. My heart hammered in my chest as the whispers grew louder and incessant. Mocking chorus. The car moved on its own, guided by some unseen force, and the twisted faces of the damned pressed against the windows, their eyes locked on me with a mixture of rage and hunger. Just when I thought I'd reached the end, that I'd become one with the damned highway, I felt a sudden lurch, as if the car had been yanked backward. The whispers stopped, and a deafening silence. Here, a voice whispered from the back seat, a voice that sounded eerily familiar. I looked in the rearview mirror and gasped. The figure in the back seat looked like me, but his face was sunken, his eyes wide with a terror that echoed my own. He leaned forward, his gaze piercing as he spoke again. "Take the exit. It's your only way out." The car jerked violently to the side, the steering wheel twisting under my hands as it veered toward the exit. I fought to gain control, panic surging through me. But something in the back of my mind whispered that this was my only chance. As soon as I passed onto the off-ramp, the figure in the mirror faded, replaced by my own haunted expression. The oppressive weight lifted, and the road ahead was eerily empty, lined with dense, shadowed trees that seemed to watch me with a silent, sinister awareness. The highway receded into the darkness behind me, the whispers fading into silence, but even as I began to feel the faintest hint of relief, the dashboard clock caught my eye. The digits blinked 3:33 a.m., over and over again, as if frozen in time. I realized with a sinking dread that I hadn't been freed, I'd only descended deeper into the nightmare. The exit led me to a narrow, winding road that stretched endlessly, bordered by fog-cloaked trees that twisted in unnatural shapes. In the distance, a figure appeared, standing in the middle of the road, shrouded in shadow. I couldn't see his face, but something about him radiated a malice that made my blood turn to ice. I slowed the car, unable to stop myself, and he stepped closer, his face emerging from the shadows. Where his eyes should have been, there were only hollow, empty sockets. He grinned, his mouth stretching impossibly wide, teeth yellowed and jagged. "You're on my road now," he rasped, his voice echoing like nails on glass. And I decide who passes. The car's engine stalled, and I sat paralyzed as he approached, his grin widening. He stopped beside the driver's window, leaning down so close that I could smell the stench of decay on his breath. "Leave," he said, voice dripping with mockery. "If you think you can." Before I could respond, he vanished into thin air, leaving only the lingering scent of rot behind. The engine roared back to life on its own, and the car jolted forward, speeding down the winding road with a force that left me clutching the wheel in terror. I wasn't driving anymore, I was being driven. The road twisted and turned, an endless stretch of black asphalt that seemed to spiral into the depths of my own mind. Panic clawed at me as I realized I'd seen this stretch of road before. The same twisted trees. The same ominous silence. I'd circled back. The exit sign appeared again, flickering in the darkness like a ghostly beacon, mocking me with the false hope of escape. My mind raced. I'd taken the exit, but I was back where I started. It was a loop, a never-ending trap designed to torment me. In desperation, I slammed the brakes, and the car screeched to a halt. The silence that followed was deafening, as if the entire world had stopped breathing. I closed my eyes, struggling to control my trembling, and whispered to myself, "This isn't real. This can't be real." When I opened my eyes, the highway was gone. I was parked in front of an old, decrepit gas station, its windows shattered. And the sign hanging crookedly, the words barely legible under years of grime and rust. I stumbled out of the car, my legs weak, as if I'd been drained of all energy. The air was thick with the scent of mildew and something metallic, something disturbingly familiar. I approached the gas station, my footsteps echoing in the eerie silence, and peered through the broken window. Inside, the shelves were lined with old, dusty cans and bottles, and a faint, flickering light illuminated the back wall. And then, I saw them rows of photographs tacked up, each one yellowed and brittle with age. Faces stared back at me, eyes wide with terror, expressions frozen in the final moments of their lives. And there, among the photographs, was my own face. The realization hit me like a punch to the gut. These were the souls of those who had fallen prey to the highway of horrors, trapped in this forsaken place, their images displayed like trophies. I backed away, heart pounding, but a sound stopped me, a low, raspy voice coming from the darkness. "Welcome to the collection." A figure stepped into the light, his face hidden by shadows, but his presence radiated an overwhelming malevolence. His voice was the same as the one that had spoken in my car. "The man with no eyes, you thought you could escape, didn't you?" He sneered, stepping closer. "Everyone does. But this road never lets anyone go." He raised his hand, and in it, he held a camera, its lens cracked and smeared with blood. Before I could react, he lifted it to his face and pressed the shutter. A blinding flash engulfed me, and in that split second, I felt myself being pulled, my very soul yanked from my body and trapped behind the glass of the photograph he now held. I was back in the car, but everything felt different. I tried to move, to scream, but I was frozen, trapped behind glass, staring out through my own lifeless eyes. I could see the gas station through the windshield. The man standing at the window, grinning as he waved goodbye. The car's engine roared to life on its own, and it began to drive down the road, carrying my empty shell into the night, back to the highway of horrors. I was now part of the curse, another lost soul bound to this road, doomed to lure others into the trap, to witness their terror as they realized the truth. The car would drive on, picking up new passengers, each one thinking they could escape, each one eventually ending up on that wall, another photograph in the collection.